At my family reunion, everything fell apart in seconds. I had barely set down the fruit tray when I heard it, sharp, loud enough to cut through the chatter and music. "That's her kid? Yikes," Brielle said with a laugh that dripped like syrup, sickly, sweet, and cruel. I froze. The words hung there, heavy and ugly. I turned slightly, enough to see her standing by the buffet table, drink in hand, smirking at her friends. And then Uncle Victor, standing right beside her, shook his head with that same disapproving frown he always wore around me. His voice was gravelly and clear as he said, "She should be ashamed." I knew exactly who they were talking about. My 6-year-old son, Luca. My bright, sweet boy who was standing right next to me, small fingers curled trustingly around my wrist. In that moment, the room seemed to shrink. The colorful streamers, the laughter, the clinking glasses, it all blurred around the edges. My heart thudded against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. Shame. The old familiar companion I fought so hard to leave behind came crawling back in, cold and merciless. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream at them. I wanted to run. I wanted to pull Luca into my arms and shield him from every nasty glance, every whispered insult. But my feet were stuck to the hardwood floor. My hands trembled. And then I felt a gentle tug at the hem of my sweater. I looked down. Luca's blue eyes, big and serious, were staring up at me. There was something there. Not fear, not sadness, something almost excited, almost determined. He leaned in closer, stood on his tiptoes so only I could hear him. "Mom," he whispered, his voice soft but steady. "Can I show them my secret now?" For a second, I didn't understand. His secret? He had insisted on bringing that little box today. I had tried to convince him to leave it at home. He was so proud of it, and I worried something would happen to it. But he wouldn't hear it. He had clutched that box tightly all morning, holding it like a treasure. Now, looking into his eyes, something shifted inside me. I nodded, barely trusting myself to speak. Luca's face lit up with a fierce, quiet joy. He squeezed my hand once, then let go and ran toward the front room where he had left his little backpack. I watched him go, my heart twisting in my chest. Around me, a few family members had turned to watch too. Brielle arched an eyebrow, clearly amused. Uncle Victor just crossed his arms over his chest as if daring me to make a scene. I took a deep breath, forcing the air into my lungs even though it felt like they had turned to stone. Luca came back a moment later, holding his box tightly against his chest. It was small, covered in stickers and colorful drawings he had carefully glued on. I could see him take a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage he had. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to snatch him up and carry him away from this judgmental room, away from the careless cruelty of people who were supposed to be family. But I stayed rooted to the spot, letting him lead. He climbed onto one of the empty chairs by the kitchen island, his tiny legs swinging for a moment until he found his balance. The chatter around the room died down. One by one, heads turned, conversations stalled, glasses paused midway to mouths. I saw the glances, some curious, some skeptical, some already dismissive. But Luca didn't flinch. His small fingers fumbled with the latch on the box, his face serious, almost solemn. And then he lifted the lid. What happened next would silence the room in a way no angry words ever could. It would change everything. But standing there, clutching a flimsy plastic plate of half-eaten fruit, I had no idea what my son had hidden inside that box. I only knew that whatever it was, it mattered to him. And in that instant, as my heart hammered in my chest and the weight of my family's judgment pressed down around us, I realized something. Luca wasn't the one who should be ashamed. They were. If I'm honest, I almost didn't go to the reunion. The invitation had been sitting on my kitchen counter for weeks, gathering dust between unpaid bills and coloring books. I must have stared at it 100 times, weighing every possible excuse. Work was busy. Luca had summer camp. Gas prices were too high. But deep down, I knew the real reason. I didn't want to face them. My family. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, but never missed a chance to remind me of how far I had fallen. Once I was the golden girl, college-bound, full of potential, a bright light in a long line of quiet disappointments. And then I got pregnant at 26, married the wrong man, and lost myself somewhere between sleepless nights and bruises I had to cover with makeup and excuses. Leaving him was the bravest thing I ever did, but it came with a price. Judgment from the very people who should have cheered me on. To them, I wasn't a survivor. I was a cautionary tale. Still, I said yes, not for them, for Luca. He was 6 years old and hadn't seen most of the family since he was a toddler. He deserved a chance to feel connected, to know he belonged somewhere. And maybe, just maybe, things would be different this time. Maybe they would see him for who he really was, a miracle of a boy who woke up every morning ready to love the world without fear. The reunion was held at Uncle Victor's house, a sprawling brick colonial with a manicured lawn and a driveway big enough to fit 10 cars. It was the kind of house that made you feel small before you even walked through the door. I dressed Luca in his favorite outfit, an orange dinosaur shirt he had decorated himself with fabric paint, paired with a pair of bright blue shorts. He insisted on wearing the beaded necklace he made in art class, and I didn't have the heart to tell him no. I saw the way he admired himself in the mirror, chest puffed out, pride shining in his eyes. "Ready, Mom?" he asked, swinging his little backpack onto his shoulders. I smiled, forcing the knot in my stomach to loosen just enough to nod. Ready. When we arrived, the house was already buzzing with voices and music. Tables covered in white linens lined the backyard, and a bounce house inflated lazily in one corner. Kids ran barefoot across the grass, shrieking with laughter. Grown-ups gathered around the grill, beers in hand, shouting over each other. At first, it wasn't so bad. A few polite smiles, a couple of awkward hugs. My cousin Harper complimented Luca's necklace, and for a second I allowed myself to believe that maybe it would all be okay. But the undercurrents were there. The sidelong glances, the forced conversations that ended too quickly. It didn't take long for the old, familiar ache to settle into my chest like an unwelcome guest. Luca didn't seem to notice. He bounded toward the dessert table, eyes wide with wonder at the mountain of cookies and cupcakes. Watching him, I felt a fierce swell of love. He was so pure, so full of joy, completely unaware of the judgment hanging thick in the air. I followed him closely, balancing a flimsy plastic plate in one hand and trying to keep my smile fixed in place. That's when I heard Brielle's voice cut through the crowd. "That's her kid." Yikes. And Victor's reply, sharp and merciless, "She should be ashamed." The words felt like a slap. I instinctively reached for Luca's hand, but he was already clutching mine. He had heard them. I knelt down to his level, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. His face was carefully blank, the way kids sometimes get when they're trying not to cry. Before I could say anything, he whispered those words that would change everything. "Can I show them my secret now, Mom?" In that moment, every doubt, every fear, every knot of shame I had carried into that house faded. I saw Luca for what he truly was. A boy brave enough to be himself, even when the world told him he wasn't enough. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He smiled, a small, determined smile, and took off toward his backpack. I watched him go, my heart breaking and healing all at once. Whatever secret he was about to reveal, I knew one thing for certain. It wasn't him who needed to be ashamed. It was them. And my son was about to show them exactly why. I watched Luca disappear into the house, his small frame weaving through the sea of adult legs and folding chairs, his backpack bouncing with each determined step. Every instinct inside me screamed to chase after him, to shield him, to snatch him up and protect him from the coldness he hadn't even begun to understand. But I stayed still. Maybe for the first time in my life, I realized I couldn't fight all his battles. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do as a mother is to step back and let your child show the world who they really are. Still, my hands trembled as I clutched the edge of the picnic table. Around me, the noise of the reunion swelled and faded, like waves hitting a shore I was drifting farther and farther from. People noticed something was happening. Heads began to turn. Conversations slowed. I could feel the weight of their stares gathering like a summer storm. Brielle was the first to notice Luca coming back. She was standing with a group of our cousins by the barbecue pit, drink in hand, her mouth curled into a lazy, amused smirk. I caught her whisper something to her friend, and they both laughed, not even bothering to hide it. Uncle Victor, looming by the grill like some kind of self-appointed king, crossed his arms and stared at Luca with narrowed eyes, as if my 6-year-old son was some unruly pet dragging mud across his precious lawn. Luca, oblivious to the undercurrent of mockery, clutched his box tightly against his chest. His little dinosaur shirt was slightly askew, his shorts rumpled from all the running around, but he walked with a strange, quiet dignity that made my heart ache. He climbed onto one of the empty patio chairs without hesitation. His legs swung back and forth for a moment, not quite reaching the ground. He placed the box carefully on his lap, smoothing the stickers on top with his tiny fingers. The crowd thickened around him. A few aunts and uncles edged closer, curious. Some of the kids ran over, expecting some kind of show. Someone chuckled. "What's he doing?" "Probably some weird art project," Brielle said, loud enough for everyone to hear. A ripple of laughter followed, light but sharp enough to sting. I caught my mother's eye across the lawn. She looked uncomfortable, fiddling with the strap of her purse, pretending not to hear. Some part of me hoped she would step in, say something, but she didn't. No one did. It was just me and Luca now. He fumbled with the latch on the box. His fingers were small, a little clumsy, but determined. I saw the tip of his tongue poke out from the corner of his mouth in concentration, the same way he did when he was building Lego castles or tying his sneakers. Finally, the latch popped open. He looked up at me then, just for a second. His eyes met mine across the yard, and in that gaze, I saw 1,000 unspoken things. Trust, love, hope. I nodded, blinking hard to keep the tears from spilling over. He opened the box. The air seemed to still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Inside, neatly arranged in rows like treasure, were dozens of brightly colored friendship bracelets. Handmade, carefully woven, each one different. Some were made of rainbow beads, others were braided with yarn and decorated with tiny charms. Each bracelet had a little handwritten tag tied to it, scrawled in Luca's careful 6-year-old handwriting. For Brielle, for Uncle Victor, for Grandma. For Harper, every single person had one, even the ones who had mocked him, even the ones who hadn't said 2 kind words to him all day. He had made them all. I could feel the shift in the air as people realized what they were seeing. The laughter died away. A few of the kids gasped and edged closer. Luca cleared his throat, his small voice piping up over the crowd. "I made these for everybody," he said, "because I love you, even if you don't like me." A stunned silence fell over the yard. Brielle's face flushed bright red. Uncle Victor stared at the box, his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Other family members exchanged awkward glances. I pressed my hand against my mouth to hold in the sob building in my chest. I had never been prouder in my life. They could mock his clothes. They could judge his mother, but they couldn't touch the goodness in his heart. And now, standing on that chair in his dinosaur shirt and beaded necklace, holding out a box full of love, my son was showing them the kind of courage most adults would never have. The rising tension was like a crackling wire between all of us, a moment balanced so precariously on the edge of something bigger, something about to break. For a heartbeat, the world stood completely still. No one moved, no one spoke. Luca sat there on the patio chair, holding his box of bracelets like a knight offering up his shield, his bright eyes scanning the silent crowd with a mix of hope and something far braver, expectation. He wasn't asking for approval. He was giving them something whether they deserved it or not. I watched him, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the birds in the trees or the soft clink of ice in forgotten drinks. This was the moment. The one where I could step in, swoop him up, and end it before it could get worse. Before Brielle could roll her eyes again. Before Uncle Victor could grunt some cruel comment that would leave another invisible scar on my little boy's heart. But deep down, I knew stepping in wasn't what Luca needed. Not today. Today, he needed me to believe he could handle it, to trust that he had something inside him stronger than their judgment. I wiped my palms against my jeans and made a choice. I took a step back. Luca opened the box wider, resting it on his lap for everyone to see. He reached inside and pulled out the first bracelet, a bright pink and yellow one with a tiny plastic flower charm dangling from the knot. He held it up high. "This one's for Cousin Harper," he announced proudly, reading the tag carefully. His voice wobbled slightly but stayed strong enough to carry across the yard. Harper, who had always been one of the nicer ones, stepped forward slowly. She crouched down, smiling hesitantly, and let Luca slip the bracelet onto her wrist. She mussed his hair gently and said, "Thank you, Luca. It's beautiful." A tiny ripple moved through the crowd. Encouraged, Luca dug back into the box, his hands finding another bracelet. This one was a mess of green and orange beads, lopsided but vibrant. "For Grandma Eloise," he chirped, holding it up. My mother, his grandmother, hesitated just a second too long before moving forward. She gave a brittle smile, the kind she wore at funerals and uncomfortable family dinners, and accepted the bracelet with stiff fingers. She slipped it onto her wrist without looking at him, but it was enough. One by one, Luca called out names. One by one, people came forward. Some smiled genuinely. Others looked down at their shoes, ashamed, unsure. Even the kids, who at first had hovered at the edges of the crowd, began to gather closer, whispering and nudging each other with wide eyes. Then came the moment that made my throat tighten so hard I could barely breathe. Luca held up a simple blue and white bracelet, the kind of color scheme you would find on an old flag or a team jersey. "For Uncle Victor," he said with a shy, hopeful smile. The entire backyard seemed to tense. Even the birds quieted, as if waiting. Uncle Victor didn't move. His thick arms stayed crossed over his broad chest, his jaw working furiously as he glared at the bracelet like it was some kind of trick. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to shake him until he saw the gift in front of him, the pure love of a child, the innocent offering of someone who still believed he could be loved back. But I stayed where I was. This was Luca's moment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Victor uncrossed his arms. He shuffled forward a few steps, the gravel crunching under his heavy boots. Without saying a word, he reached out a rough hand. Luca, undeterred, beamed and slipped the bracelet over Victor's thick wrist. Victor cleared his throat and turned quickly away, pretending to check his watch. I caught the flash of emotion that crossed his face, a crack in the armor he had worn so proudly all these years. The tension in the yard broke like a popped balloon. People exhaled, some smiled, a few even clapped awkwardly. Brielle lingered by the picnic tables, arms crossed, glaring. Luca picked up a bracelet made of shiny purple beads and a tiny heart charm. "For Cousin Brielle," he said sweetly. Her cheeks flushed. For a split second, she looked like she might refuse. But then, with a tight, fake smile, she stepped forward and took it from him without meeting his eyes. Luca didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he just didn't care. His mission was simple. Give love no matter what. As he handed out the last bracelet, my chest swelled with something bigger than pride, something fierce and untamed. Luca didn't need to be defended. He was defending himself with more courage, more kindness, more open-hearted strength than I had ever shown. And in that moment, standing in the shade of that big oak tree, watching my son face a crowd that had already decided he wasn't enough, I made a decision too. I would never, ever again let shame steal our joy. Luca was more than enough, and from now on, so was I. When the last bracelet left Luca's hands, the backyard hung in a strange kind of silence. It wasn't the awkward, judgmental hush from before. It was different now, heavier, fuller, as if every person standing there had just been handed something they didn't know how to carry. Guilt, wonder, maybe even shame, and all of that weight, was placed at the tiny feet of a 6-year-old boy who hadn't brought anger to this reunion. He had brought gifts. Luca stood on the chair for a moment longer, his empty box resting in his lap. He scanned the crowd, that fearless little smile still on his face. No part of him seemed to notice the embarrassment on Uncle Victor's face, or the way Brielle clutched her bracelet like it was something poisonous. He didn't see any of it. Or maybe he did, and he chose not to care. He had done what he came here to do. I walked toward him then, weaving through the stunned crowd, every step feeling lighter than the last. When I reached him, I lifted him gently off the chair and onto my hip. He threw his arms around my neck immediately, resting his forehead against my shoulder the way he had when he was a toddler. He smelled like sunscreen and cupcakes. I turned toward everyone, feeling their eyes on us. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small under their gaze. I felt strong. Someone started clapping, soft at first, a few scattered, awkward beats. Then more hands joined in until the sound swelled and filled the yard. It wasn't raucous applause. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was real. Even Uncle Victor clapped, half-heartedly, almost grudgingly. But he did it. I didn't smile. Not at them. I smiled for Luca, and for me, and for the invisible line we had just crossed together, hand in hand. Luca wriggled down from my arms, landing on the grass with a soft thud. He looked up at me, grinning from ear to ear, as if this had always been part of his plan. "Did they like it?" he asked, voice bright with hope. I crouched down to his level, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "They loved it, sweetheart," I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. "You made today really special." His chest puffed out proudly. He turned back to the group and shouted, "I love you, everybody!" Another round of soft laughter and clapping rippled through the yard. That simple declaration broke something open in me. All the years of worrying about being judged, about being whispered about behind closed doors, about disappointing people who had never really cared enough to understand me. All of it crumbled away. I realized then, Luca didn't need their approval, and neither did I. He had already won. Without apology, without bitterness, without raising his voice once, my son had turned an afternoon of judgment into something undeniable, a display of love that not one of them could ignore. Rhea slipped away into the house, pretending to check her phone. Uncle Victor muttered something about needing another beer and stomped off toward the cooler. I watched them go without anger. They were who they were. Their reactions didn't belong to us. Other family members came up, patting Luca's head, hugging him, complimenting the bracelets. And for the first time, those smiles, the ones they gave us, felt real, not performative, not polite, real. Grandma Eloise leaned in and whispered, "You're raising a good one, Aria." I turned, startled by her sudden softness. She squeezed my hand lightly before walking away, her new bracelet swinging from her wrist like a banner. I stood there in the sun, feeling the warmth on my skin, feeling my son's hand slip back into mine, and I knew. This wasn't the ending I had feared. This was the beginning of something new, a different kind of story, one where I didn't measure myself by their approval, but by the boy standing proudly beside me. A boy with a heart big enough to forgive the people who didn't deserve it, and a spirit fierce enough to love them anyway. And just like that, the weight I had carried for so long finally lifted. I squeezed Luca's hand. "Come on, buddy," I said, smiling down at him. "Let's get some ice cream." He cheered and tugged me toward the dessert table, his laughter carrying through the backyard like a song. And this time, when the family watched us go, I didn't feel their judgment. I felt their awe. Because somehow, against all odds, my son had done the impossible. He had changed them, and he had changed me too. Later that evening, long after the reunion had started to thin out and the paper lanterns swayed lazily in the warm breeze, Luca and I sat on the back porch steps together, a little apart from the lingering conversations and the scraping of folding chairs being packed away. He rested his head against my shoulder, one hand absent-mindedly spinning the empty friendship bracelet box between his knees. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft streaks of gold and pink. It should have been a simple, forgettable moment. But I knew, somehow, that I would remember it for the rest of my life. "You did good today, Mom," Luca said sleepily without lifting his head. I laughed under my breath, brushing my fingers through his curls. "You did better, buddy," I whispered back. He smiled, his eyes fluttering closed, the way little kids do when they've poured every ounce of their heart into the world and are finally ready to rest. In the distance, I caught glimpses of family packing up leftovers, gathering kids into minivans, waving half-hearted goodbyes. I didn't feel bitter as I watched them. I didn't feel angry. What I felt was something quieter, stronger. I felt free. For so many years, I had carried their judgments like invisible weights on my back, trying to prove I was still worth loving, trying to shrink myself to fit into spaces that were never built to hold all of me, all of us. Today changed that. Today, my son reminded me that we don't earn love by being perfect or polished. We earn it by being real, by standing in front of the people who think they know everything about us and offering them kindness anyway, whether they deserve it or not, whether they understand it or not. We love because it's who we are, not because it's who they are. That realization cracked something open inside me, something that had been begging for air for a long time. As I sat there, Luca's breathing growing heavier with the pull of sleep, I thought about how scared I had been to come here, how I almost let fear make my decision for me, and how proud I was that I didn't. Luca didn't walk away from today with everyone's approval, and neither did I. But he walked away with something better, the unshakable knowledge that he is enough exactly as he is. That no matter what anyone says, family or not, his heart, his spirit, his kindness are not up for debate. I think that's the greatest gift I could ever give him. And somehow, without even knowing it, he gave it right back to me. I squeezed his small hand in mine, feeling the sticky warmth of his palm, the way his fingers curled instinctively around mine even in sleep. Tomorrow would come. There would be more comments, more judgment. Maybe not from these same people, but from others. Life wouldn't always be fair or kind or easy. But we would meet it the way we met today, with open hands, with brave hearts, and with a love so stubborn it refused to be shaken. Eventually, I scooped Luca up into my arms, his body warm and heavy against me. I carried him to the car, past the flickering porch lights and the half-hearted goodbyes, past the old wounds that no longer felt like they owned me. As I buckled him into his seat, he stirred, blinking up at me with heavy eyes. "Mom?" he mumbled. "Yeah, buddy." He yawned so wide his whole face scrunched up. Did they like my secret? I leaned down and kissed his forehead. "They didn't just like it," I whispered. "You changed them with it." He smiled, satisfied, and drifted back to sleep. I sat there for a moment longer, just looking at him, feeling the fullness of everything he was and everything he would become. And as I started the car and pulled out of the driveway, leaving the grand house and its heavy history behind us, I realized something. I wasn't leaving as the black sheep of the family anymore. I was leaving as something much stronger. A mother who finally knew her worth, a son who already knew his, and a story that, no matter how it had started, was now firmly, beautifully ours. Thank you for listening to our story today. If it touched your heart, or if you've ever felt judged for just being yourself, I hope you'll take a second to like this video. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that kindness matters, even when it's hard. I would love to hear your thoughts or your own stories in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to hear more real stories about love, resilience, and family, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We're building something special here, and I would be honored for you to be a part of it.